After Hours with Luke Edwards, alongside Jason Van Sickle. Tonight's episode: Top 10 Most Influential Cars of the Indy 500.
Yeah, really, 1972, that's when an IndyCar looks like what we know an IndyCar to look like today. That's where you could trace it back to, with USAC allowing bolt-on aerodynamic devices. Before that, it had to be an integral part of the bodywork. So you saw all these little winglets or fins or things like that until McLaren showed up with that engine cover that really set the stage. So that's, I guess, going back to where I cheated a bit. I wanted to. It's very hard, obviously, 105 runnings, and you have a certain type of Indy 500, which I consider pre-1972. Obviously, the 60s led up to what happened in 1972 and on, so there is some ties. But after 72, it's a completely different type of race. The speeds increase. The development, the engineering of the cars increased. The composite materials later on would become more of a factor, and obviously lightness was always a factor. But you started seeing that post 72, which what we know today. So that's where I have my post 1972. 5 cars that influenced the 500.
And we saw that window a little bit. The Hemmings article only goes up to 1965.
Yeah.
And like we said at the beginning of the show, justifiably so, because, icons take a while to develop. Sometimes you need some history and some time to turn into an icon. But like we said, the style of driving changed, the speeds increased. And you really got into this era of learning to drive a land-based aircraft, because they started utilizing more technology from the aircraft industry in this era of aerodynamics. So we talk about the 1972 AAR Eagle, Dan Gurney's design.
Probably one of the most iconic cars of this era, and obviously when you can compare it to today. Dan Gurney did so much for the sport of racing, whether it be in Formula One or IndyCar. The 72 car is just a fast machine. You have a pairing of we talked about earlier, the Offenhauser engine, the turbocharged Offenhauser engine with just ridiculous amount of power. You have the new, at the time, aerodynamic guessing game. Allowances and guessing game. They didn't have wind tunnels. Bobby Unser always liked to claim later on, 10 years down the road, he had his wind tunnel with a hairdryer and scale models. But for the most part, they weren't air testing these cars.
Essentially, they were aircraft wing designs, just inverted. They were flipped upside down.
And the reason I picked the 72 Eagles over, say, the McLaren M16 variants or the Foyt Coyotes that had wings, or some of the other cars, is it was dominant. I mean, Bobby Unser in 1972 and the Champ, they were all pavement. They got rid of the dirt. The mile dirt tracks became their own series the year prior. But the
dirt races didn't count towards the same national championship. IndyCar started to, again, another milestone. IndyCar started to really take its form of what we know today, of a series that's especially for a certain type of car.
And it was all ovals too, because they kind of dabbled in the 60s, late 60s with road course racing at IRP and Riverside. But by 72, I believe they were completely done with road course. They were strictly oval. It's just amazing. Dan Gurney's All-American Racing Team and Bobby Unser, their main driver, he broke track records left and right. He set, out of the 10 races, I think he set on 7 poles. He had 4 wins that year. And here in Indy, he broke the pole record, the track record for the speedway here by just under 18 miles an hour, which is the largest jump between years. And I think it was 196 and some change or somewhere around there. It was ridiculous. And really after that, they kept saying, you know, they're going to break 200. They're going to break 200. And obviously here at the Speedway, it was, I think, 77 with Sneva that they eventually did. But later in 1972, in an All-American Racing car at Ontario, which was a faster version, almost a carbon copy of Indianapolis and Ontario, California, outside of LA, which tended to be a faster track. They broke the 200 mile an hour barrier for an Indy car in that type of car, and kind of back to Miller and the Offenhauser. If you don't realize, someone has a good idea, people either copy, modify, or just outright buy from that designer. You know, from 70, 73, 74, even into 75, really, you know, the Eagles were really the car to have.
Right, and they didn't just develop out of, you know, figuring out the aerodynamics. It was Dan Gurney who headed the operation, and he already had developed Grand Prix cars and rear-engine non-aero cars in the 60s that were successful. Bobby Unser winning his first in 1968 in an Eagle.
Customer car.
Dan Gurney finishing second in his own design. Yeah. And they won 2 Indianapolis 500s in 1973, the year after this chassis was introduced.
Yep.
And you fast forward in a time of extreme development and some rule changes, the same basic chassis won again with Bobby Unser in 1975. Yeah. So it was the car to have, and I believe it had the majority of the qualified field in 73 through 75.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was competition between McLaren and some of the other cars too, but
there were fewer McLarens, I believe. More people chose the Eagle.
Yeah, I mean, in 1974, the VPJ team switched from their VPJ4 chassis to Eagles and ran Eagles for most of the season because they saw the disparity, if you will. Obviously, they had success in their chassis, if you will, but
and that takes a lot. You know, that's kind of harking back to what Foyt did. If these people like AJ Foyt or Parnelli Jones decide to go to somebody else's design or somebody else's preference, that's saying something. That's saying that this car is not here to just be an experiment.
Yeah.
It has true performance behind it.
You know, we're sitting in the Rick Mears exhibit right now, the Rocket Rick Mears exhibit, and just on the other side of the glass room in the garage, we have a 1973 AAR Eagle that was through some. It was sold a few times. I don't want to get into the lineage of how it was sold, but it became Rick Mears' first IndyCar in 1976 in Ontario and a few other races. In the 1977, he actually attempted to qualify the car and couldn't make it because of engine. So if you look at that car by 1977 was a 4-year-old car.
And he even had a 4th place finish in that car.
Yeah. So and he did well in his, but he started out with, before obviously joining Team Penske, he started out with a struggling team with Art Sugai and then Teddy Nip.
I think that sounds right.
I think I butchered it though. But
Teddy Nip,
the Hong Kong businessman.
Yeah.
Yip.
Teddy Yip. But he started with Teddy Yip.
But Teddy Yip had a McLaren. He ended up having the M24 with the McLaren.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
he sold his team to them.
It was just with Art Sugai that he had the Eagle. But,
they called it the Pink Lady.
Yeah, but it was a 4-year-old car. By that time, by the late 70s, you know, the McLarens were dominant. You know, Foyt's car, even though it was old by that time, it was. They
had continued to develop it. And,
and Penske was making his own cars at the time.
Well, Foyt won that year.
Yeah.
Rick's first year that he showed up and failed to qualify, Foyt won in his iteration of a 1974 car that he designed.
Yeah. So, you know, that just shows how you know, just prominent this car was for the longest time.
Yeah.
Hi, Jason Van Sickle here at the Yard of Bricks with the Borg Warner Trophy. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum has big plans in our future, but we need your support to help us achieve those. Please visit imsmuseum.org under memberships to join.
And we'll move on to the true ground effects era. So this is another mark in 1979, where they weren't just relying on the rear wings and the front wings to develop downforce. They discovered that they could create essentially a vacuum effect underneath the entire floor of the car. More stability, more mid-corner speed, and now you start getting into the true, what I would refer to, just in my opinion, the true 200-mile-an-hour era, where you're not flirting with 200 miles an hour, you're not just breaking that record in qualifying, you're consistently racing at over 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean, it's another car that we have, and we didn't do this just for cars that we have in the IMS Museum collection.
We just happen to have a lot of Indy cars in our collection.
So come check them out. But we're open 363. Jim Hall, he would win in 1978 with the Lola, with Al Unser, and then 1979 introduced the Chaparral 2K, which really introduced the aerodynamic ground effects package to the Indy cars. And you had people kind of like any sort of successful racing car. You have people, I don't say struggle, but they're quick to redesign to try to catch up with the Joneses, if you will.
Right.
For a bad phrase. It's amazing to see. Al Unser really dominated the first part of the 1979 race in this car.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, had, I think, rear end issues or transmission issues that knocked him out.
Which was, back in the day, if you're running your car at full kit, you would have a lot of mechanical issues. It happened with Granatelli, which, going back to the Hemmings article, arguably the Novi's, Silent Sam, the turbines, there are a lot of cars that were kind of a woulda, coulda, shoulda car.
They
great. Should have won, but they just didn't make it the full distance.
That's why we run the whole 500 miles.
Right.
So there's a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda winners out there. We can name more than a handful on heartbreaks.
All the way down to even 2021.
2021 and all the way back to 1912 with Ralph De Palma and things like that. But, the Chaparral 2K really just ushered in this new design and dominated and really hit its stride, if you will, with Johnny Rutherford in 1980 winning both the Indy 500 and the USAC championship there. But after that, you started seeing teams try to modify old cars, like with Penske, the PC 7s. They were kind of modified 6s to run that aero ground effects package, if you will. And then they had movable skirts, which was interesting. And then USAC made them had to be fixed; they couldn't be movable, and that was a whole thing too. And then so really that set the stage for the 80s and probably into our next car that we have on the list.
Now, not to stall too much, but the Chaparral was somewhat of a Lotus 78 copy.
Yeah, I mean the ground effects pack. Team Lotus came out with that idea in 1979,
I believe. Yeah.
I always get them mixed up
because it's called the 78. But the Mario, Mario Formula One champion car
that we had an example of in the Mario Andretti,
and they had the movable skirts, I believe, in that car as well.
And it really was a derivative there, and that's what led Mario, along with his driving, but led Mario. That car was just so advanced for its time.
Yeah, you still have to get behind the wheel and take it at that speed.
You got to drive it. You got to drive it. So. That's where it kind of came from, and Hall kind of incorporated it into that 2K for 1979.
1979, and then
so it must have been 78. Sorry, might have been the Lotus Type 79 came in 78. Correct?
I believe so.
It's been a long time since I thought about that car.
Yeah. We'll go back and we'll figure this out. we'll correct it. We'll do a retweet of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
So leading into our next car, now we're fully in the ground effects era, and I think Jason and I both agree on this car 100% as being one of the top 10 iconic, influential cars, and that's the March 84C. I did a video back when I was fairly new at the museum about Teo Fabi's March this out on pole. But hearkening back to the Millers, going back to how it was the car to have. Mm-hmm. It was the most advanced car to drive. And at this point, you're looking for a car that is fairly stable through the wind at high speeds at 200 miles an hour plus, something that has a well-developed floor. And you saw a lot of teams ditch their experiments, if you will, to go purchase a car by a company that isn't competing underneath let's say, a company brand. So you're kind of leaving behind this era of where you have people developing their own chassis and running underneath their own name, the Eagles, the Curtises, the Lotuses. You have March saying, hey, we are just a chassis manufacturer. That's all we do. We don't have a team March, but we'll sell you Marches.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite fitting that we're sitting in front of the 1984 winner, because I think that's, the Marches were introduced before 1984. Obviously.
And let me correct myself. Sorry to interject. I did a thing on the March 83C, which was kind of the kickoff point for March 84.
It's similar to the nuance, I guess, between the 38 and the 34 Lotus that I talked about earlier.
Very similar cars.
It's iteration. I think 82 was the first year March showed up, and then 83 they set on pole, and they're obviously with Tom Steven won the race, and so they were established by 1984. But
the 84 was the most refined. It was a refinement of an already successful car that really set the stage. And
they had eventual, later on they would win to, most notably in 87 with Al. That's kind of one of the more memorable.
In a year-old car.
In
86, I think all but, and we'll correct ourselves if we're wrong, but I think all but 3 cars in the 86 race were Marches.
Yeah, and it's one of the things where when RP developed a Penske chassis for 1984.
That was going to be my point too. Yeah.
And he developed this car to try to compete with the March. And found out, I don't want to say found out, but determined pretty quickly, let's just, it kind of harkened to 03 when he bought a Panos and a Dallara
and the 2 different drivers, yeah.
But he didn't split the drivers like then. But
they made a conscious team decision.
They were like, you know what, if we want to win, we got to buy this car at the end of the day.
And if you develop a car that Roger Penske says, you know what, we're going to defer to this car. We're going to put our cars that we spent all our time and effort and money developing, we're going to put those back in the garage, and we're going to race.
They ran them a few times.
But for the Indianapolis 500, which is, we're talking about the top 10, they deferred to the March design, and that's the car that's sitting right behind us here is the March 84C that Rick Mears drove. That's saying something.
Race. Just dominated the race in that car. And like I said, kind of going back to the Lotus analogy earlier that I made, whereas they were already established, and it's just really the 84C is the pinnacle, I think, of that story-wise. Maybe not, technological-wise or development-wise. Maybe the 85, the 86s were more refined than the 84s. But story-wise, when you make RP switch to when he's making his own chassis and you make him switch to that March 84C and then you win, that says something.
In terms of speed and performance, it's obviously putting the numbers on the board, and then you see the following 2 years, the majority of the field switched to this brand. Mm-hmm. 84 was that pivotal year where everyone knew this was what to have. Yeah. And, we have to jump ahead a while, and we're going to move to the 90s. I think that this is the next true mark of a big shift in IndyCar racing. 1994, Roger Penske has been developing chassis for a while. He's going back to using his own chassis. And this is a car that we had in the Penske exhibit a couple of years ago. I believe that was 2016?
16, yes.
2016, so a few years ago. But it had a power plant in it called the Beast. So now we're kind of moving away from the chassis development a little bit more into the engine development. So we see a big uptick, and this is the fun era. This is single turbo V8s. I think they're revving north of 12,000 RPMs, somewhere around 13,000 RPMs. But he comes out with a brand new idea. It's not your Cosworths. It's not your typical. He comes out with a push rod engine, and he finds a loophole in the rules.
No, I mean this is another one of the great stories of the Indianapolis 500.
And there's a book written about it.
There's
called
a lot
The Beast,
of a lot of chatter. I mean this probably will go down as one of the and now we're what 27 years.
And our most recent champion, newly crowned 4-time winner Helio Castroneves, in an interview with us a couple of months ago, was still harking on this engine because the folklore around it. Well, it's not even folklore. Drivers talk about how they were entering turn 1 at 250 miles an hour plus. And arguably chassis that may have not been quite ready to see those speeds. So you're in an era where guys are pretty comfortable going flat out around this track, but this motor is so powerful they still have to back out of the gas.
The power of that engine was just it made a chassis that may have not been the best chassis design successful.
Yeah.
And that's not the only car to do that, obviously. But Roger and Team Penske found a loophole in the USAC rulebook that kind of gave special preference to try to bring what they consider stock block engines or pushrod engines, because going back to the Peugeot and the Offenhauser and the Miller Miller and Offenhauser and the Cosworth and all that, a lot of the power plants here, not all of them, but a lot of the power plants here were dual or some sort of overhead cam, whether it was dual or quad overhead cam, purebred racing engines, if you will. And the track over the years dabbled with stock blocks in the 30s and then the late 70s with like Roger Rager and
then in the late 90s.
In the late 90s too, and the Buick, which was pushrod. But pushrod engine found that there was a loophole, and they could be a little bit bigger in the cubic inch displacement, but also hold more boost, which gave them a horsepower advantage. And really just dominant. I think they had over 1,000 horsepower, and like you said, they were spinning wheels. There's reports of drivers kind of reminiscing on the cars and saying they would have to kind of baby it around the corners, or they would be able to break traction if they really powered it around there, and really just built this Ilmor built engine. It was sponsored, or Mercedes ended up pretty much paying for the place on the valve cover, so it was a Mercedes engine. But built it in secret. There was a small group of guys that would work pretty much on off hours in a shop that was disconnected to the actual Ilmor shop, and complete secret. Didn't talk about it. Didn't do anything. Even
tested in the snow.
Yeah.
Just any hours they could get on the engine, anything they could do in secret. And like you said, drivers reported breaking traction over 200 miles an hour while shifting gears. I mean, you talk about guys like Chuck Yeager and the Blackbird SR71 and big feats of people that have to hop in some machinery, going back to Neil Armstrong. You're on the brink of something that's never been done, and these guys are in a true land-based vehicle that's really a missile where it has more than enough power.
You have to turn too. You got land speed cars, but they're not straight.
And they have to figure out where to let off. So it was really what you think about a race car being, where it's so scary and it's so powerful. it's almost too much for any human to handle. And you had Al Unser Jr. and Emerson Fittipaldi and Paul Tracy who had to truly tame, and shameless plug for the book, tame this beast. And that's what the motor was nicknamed. And you know that it's iconic when it's one of the very few reasons that Rick Mears, 4-time Indianapolis 500 champion, says, yeah, that car is one reason why I sort of regret not staying in it, why I sort of regret retiring. I would have loved to have he said it in one of our interviews, and I think he said it in a few. He wishes that he could have tested that sort of power.
You know, it's amazing when you look at it and see what those drivers did, and you know, the fact that the race itself was kind of suspenseful too, because you know, Emerson kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Reminiscent of the 1989 battle between when they weren't teammates, they were competitors, but Al and Fittipaldi touching tires, and then Al going into the wall. You know, in 1994, it was Emerson attempting to lap the entire field, which Al Jr. was the last one to
second
lap.
place.
Yeah, and then ended up kind of maybe overdriving the car and putting it into the wall, and then after that, Al cruised on. I won't say cruised on because that's how difficult the car was.
Still in a 1,000+ horsepower
still
car.
had to handle the car, but you know, really the competition, which was his teammate, was done, and barring some sort of reliability issue, which didn't happen, really set the stage for Junior to win his second 500.
And Al Jr.'s car in particular, that car is really impressive because what really happened leading up to Emerson's crash was Al Jr. unlapped himself. So he had already been put a lap down, so you have your leader that has put the entire field, he's passed the entire field by a whole lap. And then his teammate Al Jr. decides to kick it into gear, maybe they made adjustments on the car, but he passes Emerson. And then Emerson's like, oh, no, I don't want you getting away from me. And in his attempt to chase him down and put him back down a lap again, crashes in turn 4. So I definitely agree. I think that belongs in the top 10. And this one might be controversial.
This is the final one.
This is the final one.
This is the final one.
This is the final one. I think. And we comment-wise, we encourage you guys to list your top 5 or top 10, or tell us what you don't think out of our top 10, what you think doesn't belong in the list.
It's the best part of this top 10 list, or 5, like the Hemmings article had. You know, it's all subjective, and it's all, you know, like I said, there's just so many great cars, whether they won, lost, you know, didn't finish, didn't even make the track in some cases.
Right.
You know, attempt to qualify or be a part of the Indianapolis 500. That it's very hard to limit it down to 5. And we'd love to see your guys' comments and your guys' thoughts on this list also.
Because this is just opinion based. Again, this is not some official IMS Museum record of these are the top 10 cars and we're the authority. No, we love the discussion. So we're going to jump all the way into the current car.
Yeah.
This car has been something that was developed all the way back from 2009 by Dallara. We've been utilizing this chassis since 2012, where we had a spec aero kit. Then you go to 2015 through 2017, where you had manufacturer aero kits. And then you move to 2018 back to spec, where they really harken back to the a little less downforce, you know, no overhead air intake, roll hoop, kart era design, very influenced by that era. Remarkable road course and street course results. I mean, some of the best racing I've ever seen open wheel wise.
500 racing.
Some of the best 500 racing, aero kit era and post.
Yeah, most of the closest finishes for the 500 are with some sort of DW12-esque lineage body.
The top 2 fastest races in Indianapolis 500 history as well.
Top 3.
Top 3.
Yeah,
that's right.
Kanan and the 14 with Hunter Ray.
Hunter Ray, and then obviously 2021 set the record with Elio. And I mean, it's everything you could want. It's even this car, the IR18 iteration with the windscreen, very controversial. But I think Marco Andretti had the best quote when he said, you know, we're going to look back in 20 years and say, I can't believe that we ever ran without it.
I remember when they had when they were going to the DW12. And that car is polarizing too, for its design. But I
purely
remember
aesthetically, controversial. The racing was amazing.
People love the racing. I remember there was some quote or video clip of it was right towards the beginning of 2012. They were just getting used to the car, and I believe it was Dario. He mentioned something along the lines of he hopped for some reason, sat in or got in a. What would have been IR8 or what?
IR9, whatever ran through 2011.
And he just felt, he was like, I can't believe we raced these, you know, compared to that next
which was an
car.
oval car.
Yeah.
In 2005, when they went back to St. Petersburg Grand Prix and started racing road courses, the Panas, I forget the DP, whatever it was called, the G-Force and then Panas cars and the Dallara cars that raced from 97 all the way through 2011 were purely oval design chassis. They were never intended to run on road courses, so the series had to adapt them. I believe Chevrolet helped design some front wing or wing packages for Dallara cars after 2008 when they all became. But this was the first car.
May have been Honda.
Chevrolet
was out of it by then.
Oh, that's true. No, Chevrolet came back in 12. That's right. But this chassis was the first chassis in the IndyCar series, you know, after the split since 1996 that was designed for both ovals, road courses, and street courses.
Well, really, a lot of those Renards were
oval
94s,
cars.
94 designed.
That's right.
Yeah, they were run in 96, but a lot of them were Renard 94Is.
94 and 95s, yeah. So it was a marquee event, and while a lot of people wish they would switch up more often and bring in new cars more often, from a racing standpoint, you know, you see a lot of Formula One Instagram pages and a lot of Formula One fans commenting and becoming IndyCar fans because the competition is so amazing and the performance is so alluring because it puts it back in the driver's hands. You have your high performance, you have your high performance power, your high performance downforce, but it's no power steering, high levels of downforce, high power. You really have everything that you're looking for to strap a superhero into to see what he can do behind the wheel.
Yeah. You know, it's one of the reasons why I put this car on the list, and obviously the last 30 years, really, the emphasis has not been so much on speed. Obviously, with at least here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the track record is now 25 years old.
Yeah.
Something like that. But it's really into the safety, and whether it's the safety of the tub, the safety of you know, moving the driver, elongating the tub in some capacity to
giving the driver more feet protection.
Yeah, the bulkhead and things like that. But really the aero screen that was introduced in 2020, I think that's a game changer. I know it's a very polarizing for fans.
And again, argue with us. We welcome that.
Yeah, it's a very polarizing issue for fans. But
and
really,
I really did not aesthetically. The whole time they were developing it, I mean, Jason and I would discuss this after hours all the time. I really didn't like the way it looked, but I think one of the exciting things about this car is this is the future. So the next Indy car that comes along, this was the pioneer. And the fact that they were able to develop this thing and put it on a car that it was never originally designed for.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you see there's been, I think we're almost to over a handful of incidents now, just from July or June 2020, that first Texas race last year because of the situation. I think there's been over a handful of incidents where you can look back and say, yep, it may have not have saved a life, hypothetically, but it did its job. And whether it be, what was it? I think definitely Iowa last year with VK and
Herta flying over the top. Absolutely.
Barber
with Ryan Hunter-Reay this year.
Hunter-Reay, Connor Daly this year
in the
with
500.
the tire.
And if you start measuring, oh well, it hit him in the nose cone. Okay, well let's measure that by feet. You're going 200 miles an hour plus, and the tire is bouncing through the air, and it missed the cockpit area where the aero screen is by
it's a lot easier to say
2 feet.
woulda, shoulda, coulda when the person's living than woulda, shoulda, coulda when the driver's
Absolutely
unfortunately passed away. So I'd rather have that than a woulda, shoulda, coulda with the fatality.
And you look at some of the concept designs that some of these artists have been coming up with for, you can get on Google and look them up. They've been designing F1 and Indy cars, and the fact that the Indy car has a full protective aero screen that can take a blunt hit from a tire at over 200 miles an hour.
Or little pieces too.
And little debris. Hinchcliffe when he got hit.
And at the Indy Grand Prix, and then you always go back to that Felipe Massa. Felipe Massa.
Yeah. The spring that bounced out.
Obviously, Formula One at that point didn't have some sort of halo or aero screen, but things like that just pose just as serious danger as more of the substantial examples. Safety is not a bad thing in racing, and unfortunately, for the longest time, you can go back and kind of highlight these innovations in safety, but at the same time, when you say it's an innovation in safety, unfortunately, in racing, it's not IndyCar, it's not Formula One, just across the board. For the most part, it's been reactive.
Right.
55 Le Mans, the Indianapolis 500 or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1957 had the first divided pit lane.
Right.
That was kind of a decision off of 55 Le Mans. There's other the tethers, obviously, with what happened in 1987 with tires, and we saw that again this year with luckily nothing ended up happening major.
But you had the aero screen.
But just tethers in general. For the most part, you see these pretty vicious crashers, and everything is kind of tethered together. For the most part, racing is reactive, but I think with this point, you can argue that it was somewhat reactive, but you have to make that first step to increase the safety of the driver. It doesn't make them any less of a driver, any less brave, or anything like that.
In fact, they raise a little bit harder, and the fact that they developed something, they developed I'll say a target top canopy. It's sort of a jet fighter with a target top, so you still can get out of the top.
They look like TIE fighters.
They look like TIE fighters, but then you look at the race this year. It hasn't affected the racing. It hasn't affected the competition.
No.
These guys, I mean, we watched one of...
And girls with Simona.
Yeah, with Simona. But we watched Alex Palou and Helio Castroneves race the last 10 laps, dicing back and forth, side by side. I mean...
Very 14 remnant. It reminded me personally of that battle between Elio and Ryan Hunter-Reay in the last few laps.
It almost looked like, jet fighters trying to get lock on each other. When you see Palou 3 laps to go, coming down to the line on the straightaway with 2 laps to go, darting back and forth, trying to avoid that target lock, trying to avoid that draft that Elio was getting, and Elio passes him on the outside. So it doesn't visually impair the drivers to the point, they're able to adapt
or anything like
that.
Yeah.
They're racing inches apart and we saw Connor Daly this May enter turn 3, I believe it was, at a max speed of 241 miles an hour in a car that has glass around the cockpit area. So
not really glass.
Not glass, but it doesn't defer their vision. It doesn't defer their performance. And, Connor, the same driver that hit 241, was able to survive a tire flying right over his head, along with Hunter Ray earlier this year.
Well, it's like he said, it came out of nowhere.
Yeah,
you know?
he didn't see it. So had he been a couple feet ahead of where he was, it would have deflected right off the glass. And again, this car with the aero screen is leading IndyCar into the next era. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited. You know, I tell Jason this all the time. We talk about how excited we are to see what the next IndyCar is going to look like, where it's an inherent part of the design from the origin of the car, how cool it can look. You know, you look at the aero screen of the 1980 and 81 Penske's, and you have the 84 March behind us here, and you know, the 84 and 85 Lola that Mario drove, where you have that kind of aerodynamic look, and it's really a catalyst into the future of IndyCar.
Yeah, no, I think it's that chassis itself obviously is a derivative of the DW12 or IR12, and that kind of go against my earlier discussions about the earlier concept of that being the catalyst of future developments. But I truly believe with the aero screen and the safety that has been, I mean, even the advancements when Hinch had his incident, you know, in 2015, because he set on pole in 16, right?
2015, the practice
they went and reinforced the tubs. You know,
they added Xylon bulletproof panels into the side of it.
So you know, you saw other safety innovations to those tubs even before the most obvious aero screen innovation or addition. So I really think that this package, if you will, of the IR18, which is a derivative of the 12, will set like you said, will set IndyCar's future for the next, you know, decades. Really, I don't see the 500 or IndyCar racing going anywhere anytime soon. But you know, I think this is the next biggest step. You know, we've had over 100 years of open cockpit, and this isn't the first time too that drivers had some sort of protection over them in IndyCar racing. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Golden Submarine with why is it escaping me right now? It's late in the filming.
They have have one of these.
Barney Oldfield.
Yeah.
Barney Oldfield. You know, he had, and it's in a replica of the cars in the Brumos collection.
In Florida.
In Florida, in Jacksonville. But it was, Harry Miller built this completely enclosed race car. Now, it never ran in the 500, but it ran in other races because, unfortunately, Barney Oldfield lost a friend in racing, and he wanted to build this car that would be more protective of him. And then you see in the 50s, there were some cage cars, if you will. We talked about this earlier. I think it was Junior Johnson practiced a roadster with a cage, what we considered in that time definitely a full cage.
Did Johnny Rutherford also practice a yellow roadster Watson or Watson derivative with a cage on it?
I don't remember that off the top of my head.
But then you had the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, you had, and then,
you said it earlier.
Yeah, it's getting late. It's getting after hours. 1969, he had a cage. It was the only car at that time that had some sort of cage protection. You guys will let me know. But
We'll remember
Bruce Walkup. He had a cage, or well, what you would consider a cage at the time.
Essentially, a crude version, but not crude for the time. The same thing that Formula One is running today.
Yeah. I mean, it looked more, and this is in the late '60s. I think dirt cars had to, and you can correct me on this, but I think dirt cars had to have at least a roll hoop by 69, somewhere around there.
I don't know dirt cars.
And then by 74, they had the full cage. 73, 74, they had what we would consider a cage, which is rudimentary with what they drive, with what they have today. But they had the full cage. But I think the roll hoop came in dirt racing in the late '60s, and then, but that was kind of a derivative. I think by 1959 in the Indianapolis 500, the cars had to have a roll hoop. 59 I think was the first year that they had to have a roll hoop here at the Speedway.
And if you always listen to, dare I say, the daredevils, if you always listen to the people that are discounting the safety, you know, we would have never put seatbelts, roll hoops, or
Fireproof
suits.
I guess I don't know what you call it, the collar guard. You know, people are complaining about not seeing drivers being able to work the wheel. You know, 'cause they like to, and I understand that part. But now, inherently with IndyCar racing, what used to be this is now this. You know,
it's like golf.
If you're here, you're having some problems. You know, or any farther.
It's like if you watch golf. If you're an avid golf fan, I'm sure you notice a bad swing or two here or there, somebody that's in trouble. You know, IndyCar racing is. If you go to an air show and you watch a jet, you're not going to see their hands moving around. And how most race car drivers describe the handling characteristics and developing a car in the 2020s, you're on a land-based aircraft. You're on an airplane with wings.
If you want great
with wheels
in today's, this isn't my own opinion, obviously, but if you want to see great oversteer car control in today's world, you either look at Pato or Rossi. I mean, there's and all drivers have their moments but if you want to see something on the regular, you watch the in-car camera for either of those two drivers, and whether it's here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway or at, you know, St. Pete or something like that, they're fighting that wheel. It may not be as egregious as Foyt in the early '60s wheeling to upright.
But the cars aren't as
Kuzma
forgiving
like
either. Yeah. I mean, you've got to think, if you're in your road car and you're breaking the law, doing 100 miles an hour in the rain, and the back of your car starts sliding out on an on-ramp.
Don't do that.
Or an off-ramp. Don't do this. But if you think about losing control of your vehicle, these guys are essentially doing the same thing.
They're fighting the car.
They're fighting the car, and they're making it through.
The car inherently wants to go to the wall. That's really what it's trying to do.
And the amazing thing about the new Dallaras is that they've created something that's good enough for every single team to use and drive at the high 230s and top speed exceeding 240 miles an hour, surrounded by walls, entering a corner. So definitely agree. I think that's our final car in the top 10.
The guys today are fighting the cars just as hard as the guys 50 years ago. And the guys 50 years ago were fighting the car just as hard as the guys in the 1920s.
And the amazing thing about this car, too, is you don't have the attrition.
Yeah.
So, at the end of this race, how many cars? We had 25-plus cars.
I think I only remember three or 4 cars being out of the race this past race.
So, your chances are even closer. The field is even closer. The pole speed was 231, and the last qualifier was 228.
Yeah, it's the closest field. So this is one of the things that make these type of lists great, whether it's the Hemmings the blog post or our post. Everyone has their own opinion on this. With the 105 years of racing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there's cars that are across the board that are just iconic, great cars, win or lose, just as the article's title said.
Yeah.
We'd love to do this. We'd love to hear your guys' opinion on the cars that we presented, on the Hemmings.com post, on those cars presented. Feel free to talk in the comment section on what cars you think we missed, what cars you think we hit the mark on, and future topics. We'd love to do this. We'd love to do this with you guys, and maybe talk about some topics that you guys post in the comments.
So, we're going to try to do another one at the beginning of next month, like you were saying. So we're open. We've thought of a few topics that we might try to hit in the next, really the rest of this year. But for our next one, we're open to suggestion. We already have a few lined up that we kind of want to talk about. I know at some point when NASCAR comes back here, we probably want to have a NASCAR episode, but you're going to have to wait for that one.
Yeah.
So, let us know other topics, argue with us about the top 10 cars.
Yeah.
We'd love to see that.
Also, if you haven't been to the museum, our Rocket Rick Mears exhibit just opened in May 1st. So that's a brand new exhibit that we have. We're excited to celebrate. Now we have a four-time winner, but the most recent four-time winner until Elio crossed the line on Sunday. We also have our Granatelli Larger Than Life exhibit that's on display here. We have the winning cars, our permanent exhibit. And then we also offer the Basement Collection Tour, which is a new tour that encompasses the entire IMS Museum collection in the Fable basement that's open to the public. So we enjoyed having a chat with you guys today. Look forward to the next one.
Good night.